The wind on the rooftop was a treacherous whisper, a high-altitude secret shared only between the cold stone and the unforgiving sky. Below, the Sterling estate sprawled out like a meticulously crafted map of power, its emerald lawns and sapphire pools shimmering under the afternoon sun. But up here there was only the edge, and Evelyn Sterling, her movements as fluid and unnerving as a sleepwalker's, was drifting towards it. Her designer dress, a whisper of silk the color of a summer sky, billowed around her, making her look like a beautiful, tragic ghost about to take flight. Her eyes, usually so full of chaotic life, were vacant, fixed on a point in the empty air just beyond the parapet. Liam Thorne watched from the shadows of a stone chimney, the silver amulet tucked beneath his uniform suddenly burning cold against his skin. It was more than a feeling. It was a premonition, a jolt of ice water through his veins. A vision, sharp and brutal, tore through his mind. Evie, her face serene, stepping off the edge, her body a silent, falling star against the backdrop of her family's perfect world. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences or calculate the breach of protocol. He moved. His polished shoes barely made a sound on the slate tiles as he covered the distance in 3 powerful strides. The air cracked with his speed. He reached her just as her foot, clad in an impossibly delicate heel, lifted to take the final fatal step. His arm shot out, wrapping around her waist, his grip firm and unyielding. He yanked her back, the momentum spinning them both around. She stumbled into his chest, a dead weight for a split second before a shudder racked her body. Her eyes blinked, the vacant glaze shattering like glass, replaced by a storm of confusion and terror. She looked up at him, her breath catching in a ragged gasp, a stranger in her own life. "What?" she began, her voice a fragile thread. But the word was swallowed by another sound, a roar of pure, undiluted fury. "Get your hands off my daughter!" Senator Sterling stood at the rooftop entrance, his face a mask of thunderous rage. 2 burly security guards flanked him, their expressions grim. He wasn't looking at his daughter, who was trembling in Liam's arms, feet away from death. He was looking at Liam, his eyes narrowed into slits of political calculation. He saw not a savior, but a liability, a scandal. "Sir, she was—" Liam started, his voice level despite the adrenaline pounding in his ears. "I saw what you were doing, Thorne," the senator boomed, advancing on them. "Manhandling her, assaulting her. You're fired. Get him off my property, now." The guards moved in. Liam instinctively tightened his hold on Evie for a moment, a protective gesture that only served to further incriminate him in the senator's eyes. He released her slowly, stepping back as the guards seized his arms. Evie stared, her face pale with shock, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Down below, a commotion had started. The distant, hungry flashing of cameras began to strobe against the estate walls. The press, always circling like vultures, had smelled blood. As the guards began to march him away, his career dissolving in a matter of seconds, his eyes met Evie's, and in that chaotic, humiliating moment, a silent, desperate message passed between them. He didn't see the pampered heiress the world saw. He saw a prisoner, her eyes screaming a truth she had no words for. And she, in turn, didn't seem to see a disgraced bodyguard. She saw the one person who had just pulled her back from the void. But to understand the silent terror in her gaze, the cold certainty that had gripped Liam's soul, and the chain of events that brought them to that precipice, you have to go back 3 weeks. 3 weeks to a world that was, on the surface, perfectly in order. 3 weeks earlier, Liam Thorne's life was a study in controlled silence. His apartment was sparse, his routine was precise, and his interactions were minimal. He was a ghost in the lives of the wealthy, a silent, watchful presence whose only purpose was to be a shield. His detachment was a professional necessity, but it was also a personal one. The one crack in his stoic facade was a small framed photograph on his nightstand. It showed a woman with his same serious eyes, but her mouth was curved into a brilliant, intelligent smile. Dr. Eleanor Thorne, his mother. For the past 2 years, she had been lying in a private medical facility, lost in a coma from which the doctors said she would never wake. Her mind, they claimed, was simply gone. But Liam knew it wasn't gone. It was trapped by the same kind of ancient, malevolent force her research had been dedicated to understanding. His only inheritance from her life's work was the weathered silver amulet he now wore around his neck, a cool, constant weight against his chest. His new assignment was Evie Sterling, the clumsy billionaire heiress, as the tabloids had gleefully nicknamed her. His briefing file was thick with incidents: antique vases shattered at diplomatic dinners, keynote speeches interrupted by collapsing podiums, and the legendary chandelier incident at the Met Gala. His job was simple: keep her upright and out of the headlines while her father, Senator Sterling, made his final ruthless push for higher office. Liam's first day was an immersion in gilded chaos. He watched as Evie navigated a morning press event in the Sterling Gardens, a whirlwind of polite smiles and near disasters. She tripped on a perfectly flat flagstone path, catching herself on a marble birdbath that wobbled precariously. If your own heart is pounding with second-hand anxiety for her, just imagine being the man paid to prevent the inevitable. Let us know you feel the pressure by hitting that like button, because the tension is just getting started. Later, during a photo op, she somehow managed to knock over a tray of champagne glasses, the sound of shattering crystal echoing like a gunshot in the perfectly manicured silence. Each time, Senator Sterling's smile would tighten, his eyes flashing with a cold fire that he reserved only for his daughter. The staff would descend in a flurry of hushed apologies and frantic cleanup, isolating the incident, erasing it from the pristine public narrative. And through it all, Evie would offer a breathless, charmingly flustered apology, her cheeks flushed, playing the part of the endearing klutz the world expected her to be. But Liam saw something else. He was trained to observe, to see the details others missed. He noticed the flicker of disorientation in her eyes a split second before she would stumble. He saw the brief, almost imperceptible moment of vacancy, as if she were listening to a sound no one else could hear. These weren't just accidents. They were episodes, small seismic tremors shaking the foundation of her carefully constructed world. One evening, late in his first week, he was making a final sweep of the grounds. He found her standing by the edge of the grand ornamental lake, staring down at her own reflection in the moonlit water. There was no one else around. The charming, clumsy facade was gone. In its place was a profound and haunting stillness. Her shoulders were slumped, and her face, illuminated by the soft light from the main house, was a portrait of raw, unvarnished fear. He remained in the shadows, watching. He saw her wrap her arms around herself, a shiver running through her despite the balmy night air. She looked less like a billionaire heiress and more like a lost child, terrified of the dark. As he watched, the silver amulet on his chest grew inexplicably intensely cold. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in 2 years, not since the day he had found his mother unconscious in her study, her notes on a mysterious, soul-trapping relic scattered around her. The cold spread from his chest, a chilling premonition that whispered a single, undeniable truth. The chaos that surrounded Evie Sterling was not of her own making, and the monster she was afraid of wasn't in the shadows of the estate. It was somewhere deep inside her. The sterile air of the motel room smelled of bleach and regret. On the small television bolted to the wall, Liam Thorne's face was frozen in a moment of grim determination, a grainy news photo captured just as security had shoved him through the Sterling estate's iron gates. The headline screamed below it, in bold, unforgiving letters, "Disgraced." He clicked the power button, plunging the room into a silence that was somehow louder than the pundit's venomous commentary. The only light came from the neon sign outside, painting the peeling walls in sickly shades of red and green. He had been a ghost his entire professional life, a shadow meant to be felt but never seen. Now his face was a national spectacle, his name a synonym for failure and betrayal. The severance check delivered by a cold-faced courier less than an hour after his dismissal was insultingly large, a sum meant to buy his silence. It lay on the nightstand, untouched. A soft, hesitant knock echoed from the door. It was so faint he almost dismissed it as the building settling. But it came again, 3 quick, nervous taps. Liam's body tensed, his training kicking in. No one should have been able to find him here. He had used 3 different cabs and paid in cash, vanishing into the city's anonymous underbelly as he had been trained to do. He moved silently to the door, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife tucked into his waistband. He peered through the peephole, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Evelyn Sterling, but it was an Evelyn he had never seen before. Gone were the couture gowns and the perfectly coiffed hair. She was huddled in a simple dark hoodie, the hood pulled low over her face, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She looked small, lost, and utterly terrified. He undid the chain and pulled the door open just enough for her to slip inside. She moved past him in a rush of cold night air and the faint, expensive scent of her perfume, a ghost of her other life. She didn't speak at first, just stood in the center of the cramped room, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding her own fragile frame together. The garish motel light cast long, distorted shadows across her face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. This was not the clumsy, charismatic heiress from the society pages. This was a haunted woman. "How did you find me?" Liam's voice was low, rough from disuse. "I have resources," Evie whispered, her voice trembling. "A man who used to work for my father. He's discreet. He owes me a favor." She finally looked at him, and the raw desperation in her eyes struck him with the force of a physical blow. The polished facade was gone, stripped away to reveal something fractured and raw. "They think I'm sleeping. My new security detail. They watch my bedroom door." "You shouldn't be here, Evie." Liam said the words, but they felt hollow. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she had nowhere else to go. "I had to come," she said, her voice cracking. "What you did on the roof, you weren't just doing your job." Her gaze fell to the silver amulet that was still visible at the collar of his shirt. You knew I was going to fall." Liam remained silent, his expression unreadable. He watched as Evie's composure began to crumble completely. Her shoulders shook, and a single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. "Everyone else thinks I'm just clumsy," she choked out, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "Or stressed, or seeking attention. My father, he thinks it's a liability for the campaign. He wants me to see another doctor, get a new prescription. They want to manage me, to fix me." She took a ragged breath. "But it's not that, it's not me." "If you're feeling the weight of Evie's desperation, show some support so we know this story is connecting with you." She began to pace the small space between the bed and the wall, her movements agitated. "For months now, things have been happening. I'll wake up and be in a different room of the house, the library, the solarium, with no memory of how I got there. Sometimes I lose time, just minutes at first. Now it can be an hour, more. It's like a piece of my life is just snipped out." Liam listened, his stoic exterior a dam holding back a flood of recognition. Every word she spoke was a chilling echo of the fragmented notes his mother had left behind. "And I see things," Evie continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Shadows in mirrors when there's no one there. A face in the reflection of a window that isn't mine. And the clumsiness, it's not just tripping. Before it happens, I feel dizzy, disoriented, like I'm watching myself from a great distance, a passenger in my own body. That's what it was like on the roof. I wasn't walking, I was being pulled." She finally stopped pacing and faced him, her eyes pleading. "You're the first person who has looked at me and not seen a problem to be solved. You saw that I was in danger. Please, tell me I'm not going insane." The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Liam walked over to the dingy counter where a cheap coffee maker sat. He filled it with water from the tap and spooned in some instant coffee, the simple, grounding actions giving him a moment to process. He poured the steaming, bitter liquid into 2 mismatched ceramic mugs and handed one to her. Her hands trembled so much the mug rattled against its saucer. "You're not insane," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. It was the most profound validation she had ever received. He watched her take a sip of the coffee, her shoulders slumping in relief. He reached up and pulled the silver amulet from under his shirt. The metal was cool against his skin. "This belonged to my mother," he explained, his thumb tracing the worn, intricate patterns etched into its surface. "She was a researcher, an academic. She studied ancient relics, belief systems, things most people dismiss as folklore." He paused, the memory still raw. "She found something, an artifact. She believed it was a focal point, a sort of psychic amplifier. She became obsessed. She said it was communicating with her, showing her things. Then one day she just stopped. The doctors call it a catatonic state, a coma. But her notes, they described exactly what you're describing. Lost time, disorientation, a feeling of being a passenger." Evie stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning understanding. "Your mother." "The visions," Liam continued, finally giving voice to the secret he had carried for so long. "They started after she fell ill. When I wear this, sometimes I see things, glimpses, warnings. They're always connected to you, Evie. I saw the teacup burst into flames an instant before it happened. I saw the staircase crumble. And today I saw you on that roof walking toward the edge, clear as day. It was a vision, but it was real. That's why I ran." The truth settled between them, terrifying and undeniable. It connected them, two strangers from impossibly different worlds, now bound by the same invisible threat. The opulent, sterile world of the Sterling estate, with its political machinations and crushing public expectations, felt a million miles away from the quiet intensity of this cheap motel room. Here, stripped of her name and his uniform, they were just two people facing a darkness that no one else would acknowledge. He saw it then with perfect clarity. Senator Sterling's rage hadn't just been about a breach of protocol. It was fear. Fear of a truth he couldn't control, a scandal he couldn't spin. It was easier to fire the bodyguard, to label him a threat, than to admit that something was profoundly wrong within the walls of his own ancestral home, with his own daughter. They weren't protecting Evie. They were protecting their image. And in doing so, they had left her completely, terrifyingly alone. At that moment, Liam Thorne's mission changed. It was no longer about a paycheck. It was no longer about fulfilling a contract. This was personal. The force that was preying on Evie Sterling felt chillingly familiar, a shadowy echo of the very thing that had stolen his mother from him. He would not let it claim someone else. "Your family's estate," Liam said, his gaze sharp, his voice now devoid of any hesitation. "You said it's old, that they dismiss the feeling you get as old house creaks." Evie nodded slowly. "It's been in the family for generations. They say it has character." "I think it has a secret," Liam replied, a new cold resolve hardening his features. "And I'm going to find it." Liam moved under the cover of a moonless sky, a phantom slipping through the manicured gardens of the Sterling estate. He was a ghost in a place that now believed in them. After his dismissal, Senator Sterling had tripled the security detail, turning the sprawling grounds into a fortress of motion sensors and patrolling guards. They were looking for intruders from the outside world, for reporters or rival operatives. They were not looking for a man who knew their protocols better than they did, a man who had designed half of them himself. He moved with a liquid grace, his dark clothing melting into the deep shadows cast by ancient oak trees. His objective was not vengeance, it was truth. He bypassed the new laser grid near the West Wing with a practiced ease, his memory of its installation serving him better than any schematic. His first target was the estate's archives, a dusty, forgotten room in the oldest part of the mansion, a place Senator Sterling deemed irrelevant. Liam knew better. Families like the Sterlings did not throw anything away, they buried it. Under layers of tax records and property deeds, he found what he was looking for. The original architectural plans from the late 1800s. They were brittle, the ink faded, but they showed a truth the modern renovations had concealed. A sub-level, a network of service tunnels, and a section beneath the grand ballroom simply marked foundation, with an unnervingly large empty space. His access point was a sealed-off dumbwaiter chute in a pantry that hadn't been used in 50 years. Prying the doors open with a crowbar took silent, strenuous effort. The groan of rusted metal, a cannon shot in the oppressive quiet. He lowered himself into the dusty darkness, the air immediately turning colder, thicker, tasting of stone and decay. The tunnels were tight, claustrophobic, but they led him directly beneath the heart of the estate. A clandestine call was a risk, but a necessary one. He used a burner phone, the number untraceable. Evie answered on the first ring, her voice a strained whisper. "Liam?" "I'm inside," he said, his own voice low and steady. "I need you to tell me exactly where you feel it the most. The cold. The presence." There was a pause, filled with the sound of her shaky breath. "The Grand Library," Evie finally said, "and the main staircase. It's always worse there. It feels like the floor is hungry. Stay in your room tonight. Lock the door. Do not leave it for any reason," Liam commanded, the protective instinct overriding any pretense of professional distance. He didn't wait for a reply before ending the call. The Grand Library was directly above him. Using the blueprints as a mental map, he navigated the labyrinthine passages until he stood beneath it. Here, the tunnel wall was different, not brick and mortar but older, hand-carved stone. He ran his fingers over the surface, feeling for a seam, a weakness. His gloved hand brushed against a recessed stone that shifted slightly under pressure. With a low grate, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, descending staircase. The cold that washed over him was not natural. It was a predatory chill, an absence of heat so profound it felt like a physical weight. The crypt was just as the blueprints had suggested, a vast, empty space. But it wasn't empty. The walls were covered in arcane symbols, glyphs and sigils that seemed to writhe in the beam of his flashlight. Liam's breath caught in his throat. He had seen these symbols before, not all of them, but enough. They were etched in the pages of his mother's notebooks, the frantic, obsessive scrawls of a brilliant mind on the edge of a terrifying discovery. His mother, Dr. Eleanor Thorne, had been chasing a legend, a myth about parasitic relics that could anchor themselves to a place and a person, feeding on psychic energy. She had called it a symbiotic haunting. Liam had called it a delusion born of grief and overwork, right up until the day she fell into a coma from which she never woke, the very same relic she was studying clutched in her hand. He reached out and traced one of the symbols, a complex spiral that seemed to pull the light into it. As his fingers made contact, the silver amulet against his chest grew intensely cold, and a jolt, like static electricity, shot up his arm. For a split second, an image flashed in his mind. His mother, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen, whispering a single word. Trap. Then he saw it. At the far end of the crypt, set into the solid stone foundation, was a door. It was made of a dark reddish wood that seemed to drink the light, and it had no handle, no lock, only a single, intricate symbol carved into its center, the same spiral he had just touched. The red door. An aura of profound malevolence radiated from it, a palpable pressure that made the hair on his arms stand up. Even from 20 feet away, he could feel the unnatural cold pouring from it in waves. This was the heart of the haunting. This was the trap. He met Evie the next day at a secluded corner of a public park, miles from the estate. She looked smaller in the daylight, her designer clothes a fragile armor against a fear that made her eyes seem hollow. She clutched a coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. Liam didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told her everything, the hidden passages, the crypt, the symbols from his mother's research. He described the red door. "It's not a ghost, Evie," Liam said, his voice low and intense, forcing her to meet his gaze. "It's a relic, a psychic parasite. My mother believed they were created to be prisons, but they learned to hunt. They anchor to a place, but they need a host to generate the energy they feed on. Someone sensitive, someone like you." Evie stared at him, her face pale. "Feeding on me?" "It's amplifying your own latent abilities, your own stress," Liam explained, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "It's turning your exhaustion, the pressure from your father, into these episodes, the disorientation, the visions. It's not making you clumsy, Evie. It's pushing your mind to its breaking point. It's using you. The truth settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Her whole life, the narrative of the clumsy heiress, was a symptom of something far more sinister. It wasn't her fault. It was a violation. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What does it want?" Liam's jaw tightened. These things, they thrive on heightened emotion. Fear, chaos, despair. They aren't content to just feed in secret. They crave a spectacle. My mother wrote that the ultimate release of energy comes from a public, catastrophic event. As if on cue, Evie's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. She held the screen out for Liam to see. The headline was plastered across every major news outlet. Senator Sterling announces massive victory rally to finalize campaign. The event was scheduled in 3 days at the city's largest convention center. It would be broadcast live on every national network, thousands of people, 1,000 cameras. A cold dread, deeper than the one from the crypt, settled in Liam's stomach. He looked from the phone screen to Evie's terrified face. The stage was being set, a massive audience, the intense pressure of a live broadcast, her father's political destiny on the line. It was the perfect storm. The entity wasn't just pushing Evie toward a breakdown. It was pushing her toward a public, spectacular, and televised demise. Senator Sterling was orchestrating the perfect platform for his daughter's destruction, and he didn't even know it. They couldn't go to him. They couldn't go to the authorities. Who would believe a disgraced bodyguard and a supposedly unstable heiress talking about a psychic parasite behind a red door? They were utterly, terrifyingly alone. Liam looked at Evie Sterling, at the woman who had trusted him when the rest of the world had condemned him. He saw the flicker of fight returning to her eyes, a spark of defiance against the crushing fear. He would not let her fall. He had lost his mother to one of these traps. He would not lose Evie. "It wants a show," Liam said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Then we'll give it one." A plan began to form in his mind, desperate and impossibly risky, a gambit that would stake everything on one single explosive moment. But it's not going to be the one it expects. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with manufactured hope, a suffocating blanket woven from ambition and $1,000 perfume. On stage, bathed in the unforgiving glare of Klieg lights, Senator Sterling was a titan, his voice a polished instrument carving promises into the electric atmosphere. He spoke of legacy, of strength, of a brighter future, and the crowd of donors and party faithful drank in every syllable. Liam stood near the back, a ghost in a tailored suit, his presence a deliberate contradiction to the sea of smiling faces. His eyes, however, were not on the senator. They were fixed on Evelyn. She was seated in the front row, a perfect porcelain doll in emerald silk, her posture flawless, her smile a beautiful, vacant curve. To everyone else, she was the picture of devoted support. To Liam, she was a statue on the verge of cracking. He saw the subtle rigidity in her shoulders, the way her gaze seemed to look through her father, through the very stage itself. A familiar, icy dread trickled down his spine. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, his fingers brushing against the cool, worn silver of the amulet hidden beneath his shirt. It was cold, too cold. A single light fixture above the stage flickered, a blink and you miss it stutter that no one else seemed to notice. But Liam did. He saw the way Evie's head tilted, just a fraction of a degree, as if listening to a sound only she could hear. The amulet against his skin suddenly burned, a searing pinpoint of heat that was both a warning and a prophecy. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the time for subtlety was over. The entity in the house had followed them here. It wanted its audience. It began with a wisp of smoke, a lazy grey curl ascending from the edge of the immense crimson velvet curtain that framed the stage. A few people in the front row coughed politely, fanning the air. Stagecraft, they assumed, a dramatic effect for the senator's crescendo. But the wisp thickened, turning from grey to a greasy, malevolent black. Then came the first tongue of flame, say a flicker of hungry orange that licked at the heavy fabric. It did not spread like a normal fire. It bloomed, exploding outward with an unnatural, predatory speed. Panic, sharp and shrill, began to ripple through the room. Shouts erupted. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as people scrambled to their feet. Security personnel rushed forward, their faces grim. But the inferno was already a roaring wall of impossible heat. Senator Sterling faltered, his powerful oratory cut short by a choked cough. His eyes darted from the flames to the panicked exodus, his expression not of a concerned leader, but of a director whose grand premiere had just been sabotaged. Through it all, Evie moved. She rose from her seat, not with the frantic energy of the crowd, but with a serene, terrifying grace. The chaos parted around her as if she were walking through water. Her eyes, wide and glassy, were fixed on the heart of the blaze, her face illuminated by the mesmerizing, destructive dance of the fire. She was a moth, drawn to a star that had fallen to earth. She took one step, then another, her movements slow, deliberate, hypnotic. She was walking toward her own televised demise. "Evie!" her father's voice boomed, not with terror for his daughter, but with rage at the spectacle. "What are you doing? Security!" But Liam was already moving. The vision from his amulet, Evie, the fire, the fall, slammed into his mind with the force of a physical blow. A guttural roar tore from his throat, a sound so raw and primal it seemed to come from another man, another lifetime. He vaulted over a velvet rope, shoving past a stunned donor who stumbled back, champagne flute shattering on the floor. "Sir, stop! Get back!" a security guard shouted, moving to intercept him. Liam didn't even break stride. He was a force of nature, a single-minded missile of pure will. He moved through the phalanx of guards not with malice, but with an unstoppable momentum. His entire being focused on the slim figure in emerald silk, now only feet from the searing heat. He reached her just as a massive, burning section of the curtain groaned and began to tear away from its rigging. He didn't shout her name. He simply acted. He lunged, tackling her around the waist, his body absorbing the impact as they hit the floor. He rolled instantly, pulling her beneath him, his suit jacket smoking as he shielded her from the cascade of falling embers and fiery debris. The heat was immense, a physical presence that threatened to cook the air from his lungs. Without pausing, he surged back to his feet, scooping her limp form into his arms. The cameras, which had been frantically panning between the fire and the fleeing crowd, now swiveled as one, their cold lenses finding them. On the massive screens flanking the stage, the image was stark and unbelievable. The disgraced bodyguard, emerging from the smoke like a myth, holding the billionaire heiress in his arms. Her eyes were still fixed on the flames, the trance unbroken. He could feel the coldness emanating from her, the psychic leech that had its hook so deep in her soul. Holding her tight with one arm, Liam's free hand ripped at the front of his shirt, buttons scattering. He tore the silver amulet from his neck, its chain snapping. It lay in his palm, pulsing with a faint, sick light, an echo of the inferno it had summoned. This was the conduit. This was the prison for his mother's consciousness and the weapon against Evie. He had to destroy the lock to break both chains. With a fierce cry that cut through the roar of the fire and the screams of the crowd, a cry for Evie, for his mother, for himself, he slammed the amulet down onto the hard marble floor of the stage. It did not just break. It detonated. A soundless wave of force erupted from the point of impact, a ripple of pure energy that washed over the room. The flames on the curtains didn't fizzle out, they vanished. One moment, they were a raging inferno. The next, they were gone, leaving behind only smoking, blackened velvet. The oppressive psychic cold that had permeated the ballroom evaporated, replaced by the mundane smell of smoke and fear. In his arms, Evie gasped. It was a deep, shuddering, ragged breath, the first true breath she seemed to have taken all night. The glassy vacancy in her eyes shattered, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning horror as she took in the scene. Her gaze finally lifted to his, and for the first time, he saw not the heiress, not the victim, but her. Recognition flooded her features. "Liam," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. The ballroom was plunged into a stunned, absolute silence. On the giant screens, the story had irrevocably changed. A political rally had become a rescue. An accident had become a supernatural assault. A live news anchor's voice, trembling with awe, cut through the silence. We We don't know what we just saw. The fire. It's just gone. The disgraced bodyguard Liam Thorne. He just saved Evelyn Sterling's life. Every eye, every camera turned from them to the man still standing on the stage. Senator Sterling was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. But as the cameras zoomed in, projecting his image 20 feet high for the world to see, his expression shifted. There was no relief. There was no gratitude. There was only the cold, hard, terrifying calculation of a man watching his life's ambition burn to the ground. In that single, damning moment, his pristine public image of the caring father, the strong leader, was immolated. He was exposed, not by a political rival, but by his own monstrous priorities, revealed to a television audience of millions. The murmurs in the crowd shifted from fear to a low, rumbling wave of disgust. His career didn't just falter. It died, right there, under the harsh lights of his own stage. Liam, still holding Evie close, finally looked across the ruined stage and met the senator's eyes. There was no triumph in his gaze, no hint of revenge. There was only a quiet, devastating finality. The invisible man, the dismissed bodyguard, had just proven that the most dangerous threats aren't the ones you can see, and the greatest acts of protection have nothing to do with a paycheck. He had walked through fire and shattered a curse, and in doing so, had revealed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The silence that followed the roar of the inferno was more deafening than any explosion. It was a vacuum filled with the hiss of fire hoses, the distant wail of sirens, and the collective stunned gasp of a nation watching on live television. Senator Sterling's political rally had become his public immolation. He stood frozen on the far side of the stage, his face a mask of disbelief, the perfectly tailored suit now seeming like a costume on a broken mannequin. The Klieg lights that were meant to anoint him now illuminated his ruin, casting long, accusing shadows. His career had not just ended, it had been erased, incinerated in the very flames that had almost claimed his daughter. Wrapped in a coarse firefighter's blanket, Evelyn Sterling sat on the bumper of an ambulance, her gaze fixed not on the smouldering wreckage of the stage, but on the man standing a few feet away, Liam Thorne. He was speaking quietly to a grim-faced police captain, his posture unyielding, a rock in a river of chaos. The shattered remnants of the silver amulet were gone, swept away, but the absence of its weight around his neck seemed to have made him taller, more present. When his eyes finally met hers across the chaotic tableau, the world fell away. There was no bodyguard and no heiress. There were only two survivors of a war no one else had known was being fought. In that single, shared glance, a silent promise was forged in the embers of her old life. The days that followed were a blur of hushed meetings and legal fallout. Senator Sterling retreated into the cavernous silence of the ancestral estate, a ghost haunting the halls of his own failed ambition. He attempted a conversation with Evie once, his voice raspy with a hollow sort of regret. He spoke of polls, of media spin, of salvaging the family name. He used words like unfortunate and misunderstanding. Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable, and when he had finished his hollow monologue, she spoke with a quiet finality that severed the last thread of his control. "My well-being was never part of your campaign strategy, Father," she said, her voice steady. "From now on, it will be the entirety of mine." It was not an accusation, it was a declaration of independence. That was the last time they spoke of the incident. True to her word, Evie began the painstaking work of rebuilding not a reputation, but a self. Her first call was to a therapist specializing in trauma and dissociative disorders. For the first time, she gave voice to the years of feeling like a passenger in her own body, the crushing weight of expectation, the subtle terror of losing time. The clumsiness was finally given a name, a physical manifestation of a mind trying to escape an unbearable reality. She started shedding the layers of Evelyn Sterling, the billionaire heiress. The designer gowns were packed away, replaced by simple linens and soft cottons. She spent hours walking the estate grounds, not as its prisoner but as its observer, reclaiming the landscape of her trauma one step at a time. She was learning the difference between a house and a home, between a bloodline and a family. Liam Thorne was reinstated, but the title on the new contract was different. Chief of Protection. The promotion was a quiet admission of the family's catastrophic failure and his singular, profound success. But his role became something far more than a title. He was a silent, steady presence in her new, quieter life. He no longer walked 3 paces behind her, he walked beside her. His watchfulness was no longer just about external threats. It was a source of grounding comfort. He knew when to speak and when to simply exist in the same space, allowing the silence to be a balm rather than a void. He would find her in the library, lost in a book, and place a cup of chamomile tea on the table beside her without a word. She would find him in the security office, studying blueprints, and would wait, knowing he was aware of her presence, until he looked up and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Their conversations were sparse but meaningful, orbiting the simple truths of the day rather than the complexities of the past. They were building a new language, one of trust and mutual respect, brick by brick. One cool autumn evening, nearly 3 months after the fire, Evie found herself standing on the grand terrace overlooking the East Gardens. It was the very spot from which the rooftop parapet was most visible, a stark silhouette against the twilight sky. She traced the line of it with her eyes, feeling not a phantom terror, but a distant, quiet sense of victory. She had survived. Liam appeared at her side, as if summoned by the thought. He didn't speak, just stood with her, his presence a shield against the ghosts of memory. "I used to hate this view," Evie said, her voice soft, carried on the breeze. "It felt like a cage, a beautiful gilded cage where I had to perform. And now?" Liam's voice was a low rumble, a sound that had become synonymous with safety. "Now," she turned to face him, the fading light catching the newfound strength in her eyes. "It's just a view. The cage is gone." As she turned, the heel of her simple flat caught on an uneven flagstone. It was a simple misstep, a moment of pure, unadulterated human clumsiness. For a fraction of a second, her body tilted, her balance lost. Liam's arms were there before she could even register the fall, his hands closing around her waist, steadying her with an effortless strength. It was a familiar motion, a mirror of that terrifying day on the roof. But everything was different. There was no panic, no desperation. His touch was firm, protective, but gentle. Her hands came to rest on his forearms, the warmth of his skin seeping through the fabric of his shirt. In the past, she would have pulled away immediately, flustered, apologizing for her clumsiness. But now she didn't. She stayed there, within the circle of his arms, and looked up into his face. His expression was one of pure, unguarded concern, his dark eyes searching hers. The professional mask was gone. In its place was the man who had seen the truth of her, the man who had shattered his own legacy to save her. She finally fell, truly and completely, into his arms. Not from a rooftop, not from a stage, but from the precarious, lonely heights of her old life. It was a quiet surrender, a willing descent into something real and true. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against the solid wall of his chest, and breathed in the scent of him. Clean, simple, safe. His arms tightened around her, a protective embrace that was both a promise and a homecoming. The world had watched a billionaire heiress nearly die, only to see her saved by her stoic bodyguard. But what they would never see was this quiet, profound moment, where the true salvation began. It wasn't about the rescue from the flames, but the slow, steady healing in the arms of the one person who had always seen the woman, not the heiress, and had chosen to protect her soul long before he was ever tasked with protecting her life.